This video will cover compositions in geometry. Compositions are when two or more transformations are performed one after the other. The first transformation produces an image, and then the second transformation is performed on that image. So we end up going from, say, a point A maps onto A prime, which then maps onto A double prime. And our notation looks something like this. We have this little dot in the middle, which means composed with. It's important that we understand that we have to read this transformation from right to left, meaning that we would do the translation first and then the rotation second. Again, we read from right to left. That's very important because if you go backwards, you're not going to get the same result as you would if you had done it correctly the first time. So here it says graph triangle ODY with those three coordinates, O, D, and Y. So take a second to graph that. Pause the video while you do it and then hit play when you're ready. Okay, so you should have something that looks like this, ODY graphed on your graph. On the same set of axes, draw and label O prime, D prime, Y prime, and O double prime, D double prime, and Y double prime after a reflection in the y-axis composed with a reflection in the x-axis. So remember here we have to read from right to left, meaning I have to reflect over the x-axis first. So I'm going to take a second to do that. Remember, when you're reflecting over the x-axis, you're simply just counting boxes. So for example, O is one box away from the x-axis, so I must go one box beyond, and this becomes O prime. And I'm going to do the same for each of these. After I list them, or plot them, I'm going to list their coordinates off to the side. So go ahead and do that on your own, and then stop back in once you're finished. Okay, so you can see here that I've listed both the coordinates for the original triangle, the pre-image, ODY, and now the new image, O prime, D prime, Y prime. And I just want to take a second to talk to you about if we had chosen to use the rule for the reflection over the x-axis and then graphed afterwards. Remember, the rule for using reflection over the x-axis is to keep the x the same and negate the y. So I took that x of -5 for point O and kept it, but then that +1, the value of y, I negated, and it became -1. So now I'm going to take and do my second step, reflection over the y-axis. Now, instead of going back to the original triangle, I need to use this new triangle, the purple one, O prime, D prime, Y prime. I'm going to take that triangle and reflect it over the y-axis. So here D is one square away, or D prime rather, and so now I go one square beyond it and it becomes D double prime. I'm going to continue doing this, and then I'm going to list the new coordinates as O double prime, D double prime, and Y double prime. So take a second to do that on your own and then check back in. Okay, so I now have my coordinates listed for O double prime, D double prime, and Y double prime. And again, if we had chosen to use the rule for the reflection over the y-axis, we could have done so first and then graphed afterwards. And that rule tells us to negate x but keep y because we're reflecting over the y-axis. And so here, our last question is asking us what single transformation, what one transformation, is equivalent to doing this composition. And so what they're asking us is, how do I go from, say, O to O double prime, or D to D double prime? And same thing for Y to Y double prime. So I have to figure out what that mapping is to go from my triangle up here in pink down towards this triangle down here in blue. So if I look at the coordinates, I see that I am negating the x and also negating the y. And now there's two different transformations that are equivalent to doing this. The first one is reflection through the origin. If I were to have reflected triangle ODY through the origin, it would land on top of O double prime, D double prime, Y double prime. Or we could talk about rotating around the origin 180 degrees. If I had rotated clockwise 90 and then another clockwise again 90 degrees for a total of 180, I would land on top of O double prime, D double prime, Y double prime. Example 2 is another basic composition. It says the point 3, -2 is rotated 90 degrees about the origin, and then dilated by a scale factor of 4. What are the coordinates of the resulting image? Now earlier I kept telling you that we have to do the composition on the right first, and then the composition on the left second. However, that's only when it's written out in that notation, where we have the composition little circle in the middle. If it's written out here in words, just like in example 2, then you do what it says first, then do what it says second. So you have to look for those key words. If it's in the composition notation, again, like we saw in example 1, you have to read from right to left. But if it's written out in words like we see in example 2, you read it based on however they're telling you to do it. For example, we have to rotate 90 degrees first. So if I take that point 3, -2, and I want to rotate 90, that tells me to use this rule -y, x. So I take that -2, bring it to the front spot, and negate it. So it becomes a +2, and just move the x value to the back spot. After this, I have to dilate by a scale factor of 4. That means to multiply each of these points, each of these coordinates, by 4. 2 times 4 is 8. 3 times 4 is 12. So here I end up with choice 3, 8, 12. In our last example, again, basic composition, says given point A, -2, 3, state the coordinates of the image of A under the composition translation -3, -4, composed with reflection over the x-axis. So here is an example where I have to work from right to left. So I start with the reflection over x, and then translate by -3, -4. So I'm going to start with point A, -2, +3, and I'm just going to use the rule for reflection over the x-axis, which tells me to keep x, negate y. So now A maps onto A prime at -2, -3. From here, we have to translate by -3, -4, which means I subtract 3 from x, subtract 4 from y, because both of these values in the translation were negative. If they were both positive, then I would add to both x and y. You do whatever the symbol is telling you to. And so here, A double prime, my final image, ends up at -5, -7. So again, compositions is just when you have 2 or more transformations applied to one given point or image or whatever it happens to be, one triangle, one set of points. And remember that we need to make sure that we're reading from right to left. Feel free to pause this video and go back and rewind it if you need to. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy your compositions.